My name is Scott Hicks. I'm Director of the Teaching and Learning Center. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Vanessa Hawes, Interim Director and 504 ADA Coordinator for our Accessibility Resource Center. Today's presentation is titled Working with Students with Autism. As the prevalence rate of students in the autism spectrum is increasing, you as faculty can expect to see more students with this diagnosis in your classroom. This session will focus on information from TEACH and take a closer look at individuals on the autism spectrum to include characteristics, behaviors, and tips or hints for most effectively working with these students. Vanessa, thank you for joining us today.
Right. Thank you so much. I appreciate you all being here, and I thank you for your interest in this topic, working with students on the autism spectrum. I'm going to go ahead and turn my video off and just focus on the slides here in just a moment. But if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll be happy to talk with you through the presentation and or at the end. This information I wanted to let you know is taken from TEACH. It's the TEACH Autism Program. I went to a seminar of theirs. They focus on services across the lifespan for those on the autism spectrum. They're from UNC Chapel Hill, and they are a wonderful resource. They are TEACCH. This is what they look like. So if you see this logo, that is them. But their neurodiversity presentation is what I attended, and that's what this will be from. So let me stop my video and let's get moving. So we mentioned prevalence rate of students on the autism spectrum or students on the spectrum. The rate is going up. Now that may be because there's better diagnosis, there's better detection. Maybe it's that we know more what we're looking at. Whatever reason, it's going up. If you look at 2002, it was 1 in 150 individuals were diagnosed as being on the spectrum. By 2018, it was 1 in 59. By 2019, UNCP served 20 students, and we're climbing slightly. In 2021, right now, we serve 24, but we're constantly seeing this number go up. So if you think about it, maybe it's more acceptance, maybe it's better services at college. For whatever reason, this number is increasing. During the next 10 years, we can expect about a 151% increase in transition age youth on the spectrum. That is staggering. Think about post-secondary education and adult outcomes for those on the spectrum. 39% of individuals complete their post-secondary education. That's compared with 51% in the general population. So your number's already lower to start with. You know the benefits of a college degree. I guess I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. You know if you earn your college degree, you're going to have better earnings, better job satisfaction, improved health. You're going to have a lot better, a lot more opportunities. So let's talk about this neurotypical syndrome. This is from Harvey Bloom in Neurodiversity. This was published in The Atlantic. Think about this point of view. This is not our typical point of view. Neurotypical syndrome is a neurobiological disorder characterized by preoccupation with social concerns, delusions of superiority, and obsession with conformity. Neurotypicals have a terrible difficulty adjusting to the predictability and logic of computer technology, instead expecting the machine to conform to their wishes. Now think about that. Being neurotypical myself, I would kind of like the computer to conform to my wishes, and I would like those kind of things. Think about that. Think about that perspective. Neurotypical syndrome is a neurobiological disorder. Very interesting to think about it from the other side. So neurodiversity is an approach to learning and mental health, which argues that neurological conditions are the result of normal variations in the human genome, with neurotypical development being simply the most common, most prevalent. Less prevalent, or maybe neuroatypical forms of neurological development would be things like dyslexia, ADHD, students on the autism spectrum, less prevalent forms of neurological development. Things that we're not necessarily used to seeing, things that students that come through our office and conditions and things that we would accommodate here at the Accessibility Resource Center. But think about this, neurodiversity may be every bit as crucial for the human race as biodiversity is for life in general. Truly, who can say what form of wiring will prove best at any moment? Cybernetics and computer culture, for example, may favor a somewhat autistic cast of mind. Think about that. As we go through, I'll talk a little bit more about how students on the spectrum think. They're simply wired in a different way than neurotypicals are. But let's think about disclosure. When a student comes to us at the Accessibility Resource Center or comes to you, when they disclose that they are on the spectrum, you can have a wide array of emotions and feelings that go along with that. It may be embarrassing to them. They may have been taught to be embarrassed. Their families may be embarrassed by them. Their classmates, the people that they encounter in life, may be embarrassed. They may have preconceived ideas about how people are going to accept them. We may have preconceived ideas about how they're going to be. They may be compared to TV characters on the spectrum. Think about who you've seen on TV on the autism spectrum. I think about Rain Man. I think about Julia from Sesame Street. I think about The Good Doctor. Probably the one you hear the most these days. Think about The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon Cooper. I also think of Amy Farrah Fowler. That is Sheldon's girlfriend on the series. A lot of people have argued that she is on the spectrum. If these are these larger than life personalities that we know are on the autism spectrum, then what does that mean for the students sitting in our classroom? They may or may not appreciate being compared with these people. Another thing, once you've disclosed, you can't take it back. Once the cat's out of the bag, as they say, well, you can't put it back in again. So once they have shared this information with you or with us here at ARC, they can't take it back. They know that it may be held against them. It is scary. It is risky to disclose. But if they're going to get services, if they're going to get accommodations, they've got to disclose so we can work with them. Let's talk a little bit about the culture of students or individuals on the autism spectrum. Think about person first language. It's the person first who happens to be diagnosed with this particular diagnosis. Reframe their deficits as, well, you're not deficient, you're not lacking. It's a different way to think, a different way to learn. They do perceive the world differently. They think and they learn differently. Their wiring is different than those of neurotypicals. The reasoning behind their behavior is very often different than the reasons for odd behavior or misbehavior from other students. This is what I have seen so many times, and it's so surprising. There's a handout I would like to share with you. Once we're done, I'd like to email this out to you. It's something that Teach put together, and it is Learning Social Communication and Emotional Regulation Challenges in Autism. It's 3 columns. It tells you the autism spectrum disorder difference, behaviors may be interpreted as, and then strategies for support and success. The first time I read this sheet, it was mind-blowing. It made so much more sense because there were some things I thought intuitively, some things I had seen. This pulled everything together. So I would love to share this sheet with you once we are done. I can email it to you. I have it in PDF. Let's think about strengths and interests for students on the spectrum. They tend to be, of course, every stereotype does have its downfalls, but overall they tend to be very strong visual learners. Maybe not as strong auditorially, but visually they tend to be much better. So they're going to need those visual strategies. So if they just hear it, it may not be the best, but if you can put a picture or a graphic or anything up there, it's going to help it stick better in their brains. They tend to be very detail oriented and able to find patterns that we have long since overlooked. Think about Temple Grandin. Think about her work with livestock. The patterns that she found, the things that she did, it was amazing. If you haven't read up on Temple Grandin, I would definitely recommend that you do so. They tend to be unique problem solvers. They may get to a solution that you and I never would have thought about. We never would have thought to go in that path to reach that goal or that answer. Memory skills. You will often see very niche interests, maybe statistics, facts. I have known students who could quote baseball statistics for days. Like I got tired listening to them because I absolutely ran out of ability to process all the memory that they just had stored up there. I've also known students who could tell you anything about the presidents. They could start with the current administration and go all the way back and tell you each person, each vice president, the entire cabinet. It's amazing, but these niche interests. If you'll think about, to be stereotypical for a moment, think about the Big Bang Theory, think about Sheldon Cooper, think about his interest in trains, a very niche interest, but he can tell you so many things about trains. One kind of refreshing thing about students on the spectrum, they tend to be less involved in the social drama. They don't have time for that. The way they are wired, it's not something that drives them. Often, lots of times it goes right over their heads and they miss that because sometimes they can't see the forest for all the trees. In terms of these, quote, cultural differences as well, there are learning differences. They tend to very much be rule-based learners. Implicit learning, like this automatic learning, it tends to be a relative weakness. They may seem illogical. They may miss key concepts. You may think, but we said this, you should automatically generalize to this. Well, as you can see in the next point, they have a lot of difficulty with generalization. It's hard to exhibit the same skill across people, places, etc., because once you've done something in exactly one context, that's exactly one context. To have to generalize that to another, well, that's a whole other situation for them. It's much harder for them to know what to do based on prior learning, prior experiences, things we take for granted. It's much different for them. They may seem confused about the rules and expectations from one situation to another because truly it wasn't exactly the same situation. Case in point, let me read you this graffiti story. This is from Donna Williams, Nobody Nowhere. And she writes, the significance of what people said to me when it sank in as more than just words was always taken to apply only to that particular moment or situation. Thus, when I once received a serious lecture about writing graffiti on Parliament House during a class trip, I agreed I'd never do this again, and then, 10 minutes later, was caught outside writing different graffiti on the school wall. To me, I was not ignoring what I had been told, nor was I trying to be funny. I had not done exactly the same thing as I had done before. My behavior puzzles others, but theirs puzzled me too. It was not so much that I had no regard for their rules as that I couldn't keep up with the many rules for each specific situation. Now think about that. How many times do we generalize from one situation to another, go on about our day? It happens without thinking. It's something innate to us. That's something that we work with our students on the spectrum to do because that is not necessarily, in fact, it's oftentimes, most oftentimes not an innate ability for them. Let's talk more about these cultural differences. How do you support these learning differences? Use very direct, very explicit information. It really is okay to state the obvious. You may feel elementary doing so, but it is okay to state the obvious. Clear, specific language about expectations and rules, visual supports to back it up, information, signs, symbols. For instance, this example about the Chapel Hill Transit. This is something that was shared in the workshop. There was a student who was learning to take public transportation for the first time. And to make sure he got what he needed, here was his cheat sheet that he kept. What to do to take public transit. Arrive 5 minutes early at the bus stop. Check the sign above the window to be sure it is the G bus. Wait for any passengers getting off the bus. Now we do that innately. That's not something we have to think about. Get on the bus through the front door, sit on the right side of the bus, pull the red cord at least half a block before the stop, Exit through the back door. Do not cross the street in front of the bus. How much of that would we just have known and applied innately from situation to situation? It's not that easy for someone on the spectrum. Use strategies in your classroom and when working with these students that can be generalized across situations. Even though it's difficult, we're still going to try, we're still going to work on that. Templates, timelines, any kind of graphic organizers. Something that is so very difficult for our students. If you can help explicitly explain the hidden rules of those social expectations. For instance, I was working with a student, and when she needed to send out an email, she would just start right into, not dear professor, it was, this is what I need you to help me. And so when I would work with her, I would say, okay, so let's talk about email etiquette. You have to say, dear so-and-so. Well, it's going to them. Why do they need to know? But email etiquette says, dear so-and-so, Professor so-and-so. I said, it's nice if you can have a, I hope you're doing well today, some kind of greeting, then start into what you need. And don't forget, sign your name. Those little things. Once that student got a template going, I've noticed this is how she each time emails people now. And there was another gentleman where I used to work whose name was Hank. Hank had an issue with personal space. His definition of personal space and ours was very different. Hank would come nose to nose with you and stop. Personal space was not an issue to him. He didn't like it actually, but it was very uncomfortable for all those around him. So what we worked with Hank in doing is saying, this was in the pre-COVID days, we worked with him because he could never figure out how close he could get to someone. We said, reach out your hand, shake their hand, and stop. So this was Hank and the handshake, because you knew whenever Hank saw you, he was going to reach out his hand, shake your hand, but he wouldn't come any closer. But that was something that we put in place to help him realize social distancing. Anytime you explicitly explain something like this, check for understanding. You may have done a great job explaining, but did they truly understand it? That's what we need to make sure of. There are also learning differences. Sticky attention, that central coherence, they may focus on details and ask detailed, repetitive questions about very intense, very narrow interest. They can't see the forest for all those pesky trees. I was in a meeting a couple years ago with a club, and they were discussing mascots. They thought maybe we need a mascot. And one of the students said, I know exactly what we need. We're going to need a bear. So this was at the beginning of the hour. And about every 10 minutes, something about the bear made its way back into conversation. Even though we had long since left the mascot discussion, that's where that student stayed. And so we heard about the bear and heard about the bear and heard about the bear. And I could tell the other students in the room were getting frustrated, but the student on the spectrum just needed to talk about that. That was the one piece of sticky attention. So I, as the facilitator of the meeting, that's what I had to facilitate. That's what I had to kind of calm down and help to put in the background. The way I handled that, I told the student, I said, come to my office, we'll talk later, make your notes, and then let's talk about it afterwards. So that did help take down that attention some. You'll also see them with difficulty disengaging and shifting attention, like the mascot. They may seem to be daydreaming or really stuck on certain topics, but that's what's occupying their brain against that sticky attention. They may have difficulty seeing the neurotypical, our definition of big picture. They may seem to miss the main point of the lecture. Again, they're lost in the forest because of all those little trees that they've got to look at. Think about your shifting ability. This is the Stroop effect, cognitive interference in which a delay in reaction time occurs due to a mismatch in stimuli. If you look at this chart that we have, you can read the words. You can read the words clear as day, but can you tell me what colors they are? If you look at the first one on the top left where it says red, can you read the words quicker Or could you tell me what color that red actually is quicker? My bet is that you can read the words quicker, but if I ask you to tell you what color it actually represents, it's going to take a minute because you have a delay in your reaction time. Your stimuli are mismatched. You're not used to seeing that green color come at you when the word clearly says red. That's what happens so many times with our students on the spectrum. The stimuli that's going into the brain are mismatched. That's why many of them use extended time testing, because they know the information, just like you know the information in this chart. It's not that anyone has a lack of intelligence. It's just getting the stimuli to match up so I can show you what I know. It's coming in one way, it's getting jumbled, and then it's coming out a different way. It takes me a little longer if this is my stimulus here. It's taken me a little bit longer to be able to show you what I know and how I know it. And this is one reason, like I said, some of our students, most of our students on the spectrum do use extended time testing. They may find it very pleasurable to finish a task like this, to finish testing or something like that. The other frustrating part, it may not be on our timetable. In terms of more cultural differences, for how to support with learning differences, use visual cues. Again, direct attention to important, relevant information. Can you highlight? Can you give PowerPoints? A lot of us now are posting PowerPoints in our lectures because so many things, we have an online component now that COVID is here with Canvas. That is actually very helpful for our students on the spectrum and others as well. Use a variety of visual cues to help disengage and shift attention where it needs to be. Sticky notes, notes on their phones, visual reminders to read before class. I know I've worked with students and had them put in their class notebook sticky notes that say, this is where we start, this is what we do, or a reminder on their phone to, okay, stop, disengage, do this. So many things we take advantage or take for granted, I guess, when we shift attention. You need to overtly remind them. We need to overtly remind them to do that. Use graphic organizers, smart art, processes, lists, hierarchies, organizational tools. Those are so very important for them. And to jump back up for a second, we talked about drawing attention to the important and relevant information. That is another reason that a lot of our students use a note taker if they are on the autism spectrum. Again, getting lost in the forest for the trees, they'll be taking notes on the lecture, but they may get distracted by something that is not the main point. It may be harder to understand the big picture, the neurotypical big picture. So that's why a note taker comes in. Students on the spectrum should be taking their own notes as well. All students should be taking their own notes and using their note taker's notes as a supplement. But this can help them see, this is what I've taken. Okay, this is what somebody else said. I need to see how these two interrelate. With learning differences, there may be auditory processing challenges. Typically, they are not as strong auditory processors. Like we said before, they're better visually. They learn from what they see. They tend to think in pictures. Again, think about Temple Grandin. They may struggle to attend to lectures if there's no visual stimulus there. They may have difficulty with abstract language. They're very concrete, very literal thinkers. They may misunderstand jokes or teasing, metaphors, sarcasm. I've had students come to my office after a lecture and say, the professor said this, and everybody laughed. I have no idea what that means. And I've had to explain some very things I thought a college student should know, but they didn't get those nuances, those double meanings. And so I've sat down and said, when you hear this, don't forget it can also mean this. And I've had to have some very parental discussions sometimes with students to help them understand what was said. Sometimes they were very embarrassed, they didn't know, and then very embarrassed what the true meaning was. But at the end of the day, I'm grateful that they will come to our office and ask honestly, hey, I don't understand, can you help me? You may see also delayed processing of verbal language. They're going to seem to be a step behind. That's that stimuli not matching up. Another reason for extended time on test. And you'll notice they'll be tracking along with you. You may notice in classes They're a little slower to raise their hand or slower to participate sometimes. Sometimes they are truly one step behind. They're getting there, just at a slower rate of speed. Don't assume understanding. Check in as often as possible. I know it may be frustrating, but check in as you can. Frequent check-ins, even written or just quick questions. Encourage them to ask for help as much and as early as possible. Encourage them to use your office hours. Don't be afraid to say, if you have questions, make a list. I've told my students this a bunch. If you have questions, make a list during class. Go see your professor during office hours, because you want to be very respectful of their time in class. They only have a limited number of minutes for classroom instruction. Make sure you don't dominate that. And we'll talk about that in a moment as well. Use concrete examples and visual cues. Can you draw it? Can you somehow put it up there so they can hear it and see it? And the more senses you engage when you learn, the better someone is going to be able to remember. Be very intentional when you use abstract language, especially with students on the spectrum, and/or be prepared to go back over if they come back with questions. Another good thing to do is simply turn on the captions. If you are showing a movie, if you're showing any clips, it helps with understanding language, because remember, they're much more visual. So if they are listening to it, if they're reading the captions, it's going to help boost their understanding. Captions are good in so many ways. I guess as a commercial for captions, even if you're sick one day, if your ears are stopped up, if you drifted off, if you had a moment and you didn't understand the speaker's accent or something like that, you can always look at the captions and get back on track. So it's a good universal design piece. Allow time to process and to formulate a response. So when you ask a question in class, give just a minute, and then you can ask, okay, who has the answer? You'll see this when working with deaf students as well. The interpreter is going to be just a bit behind. If you can give an extra couple of seconds, then everybody's on the same playing field to be able to answer the questions afterwards. I think the most important thing, model patience. I know it is frustrating sometimes. It's frustrating to the students themselves who are on the spectrum. It's frustrating to the professors. It's frustrating to those around them. So patience is so key. In terms of executive function, you're going to see difficulty with organization and time management. My goodness, we see lots of this in our office. We have students who will come work with me and/or our graduate assistants on this very thing, because organization and making sure everything gets where it needs to go and is completed on time, it's not that they intellectually can't do it. They're wired differently, and that executive function, it just works differently. You'll see weak organizational skills, sequencing, planning. You'll see issues with turning in assignments on time, maybe being late to class, long-term semester planning. Again, this is what our grad assistants and what I help them do sometimes. You'll see difficulty with transitions. They may be confused or anxious when you see changes to the syllabus, to class schedule, to whenever the semester went completely online a year ago. It was very, very anxiety provoking. I know we are getting ready to move to West Hall, and one of our students on the spectrum came in for a scheduled meeting with me, looked at the boxes in the hall and looked at me and stopped stock still and said, "You didn't tell me you're moving. Are you moving? I don't like change. This is not good." Just that little bit was enough to cause anxiety, because they are that averse to change. That anxiety may make them come across as rude, maybe combative. This unpredictability, think about what happened with COVID. We all had minutes to change to a completely online course delivery, and it was very hard on everybody, not to mention our students on the spectrum who crave that order and that set schedule. You know as well as I do, the past year has been nothing with order and set schedules. It feels like everything's been up in the air. It's been especially difficult on our students on the spectrum. Provide and refer to written information for sequencing. Encourage your students to do organizational sequencing things, planners, lists, whatever is best for them. Help them develop and use self-monitoring strategies. This is something we work with our students to do as well. Set alarms. Okay, you've completed this task, move on to this one. Visual reminders. Sometimes it's colors, it's highlights, sometimes it's sticky notes that we use. Put assignment due dates on the calendar section of your syllabus. I think most of you do this as well. Make sure they can clearly see what is due, when is it due. Clarify for them the best way to seek help from you if they need it. Encourage them to ask for help. If things stay structured and stay solid to the best of our ability at this time, it's going to help them be able to bring their anxiety down. It'll be less frustrating for them and less frustrating for you as well. Social differences. Students on the spectrum typically have challenges taking multiple perspectives. They may not recognize and truly may not understand the thoughts, feelings, beliefs, intentions of other people. It's hard to get in somebody else's head, very hard to get in somebody else's head for them. That may make them come across as rude or more often socially awkward. But it's just because they don't understand that empathy is not strong with them. Responding to another's emotions can be very challenging. They may forget, truly, honestly, innocently forget, or not understand that people have thoughts different from their own. They may not understand how to respond to them. I've had this discussion with students where they truly forgot that people could think differently than them, and it's okay because we all think differently. I've had that discussion lots of times actually with our students. They may come across as uncaring, or self-centered. They may come across as having a definite lack of empathy, but it's from this challenge with taking multiple perspectives. Use visual cues and clear, explicit rules, if needed, to support social understanding and promote social engagement. Help students develop and use these written rules to be used before each class. That's something we do, maybe a personal notebook. What we'll do is say, if you're going to English, in this English class, you need to always check for these things. Make sure you go in, you sit down, you open your book, make sure your homework is done before, all your questions are written on the side of your paper so you can ask. Things that we take for granted, all our materials are ready, we've done this, those kind of things. We will do, sometimes work with students to say, make sure that you have all these things in order for each class. There's also, we kind of do sometimes a tips and hints for doing college. Think about all the things we do during a semester. We might do a semester's cheat sheet. It is, by this time in the semester, you need to be thinking about pre-registration. You need to be talking with your advisor. You need to be doing your housing. You need to check in here, check into the things that we automatically do. We just kind of know what the normal semester progression is going to take. Sometimes with our students on the spectrum, we will write those out so none of those little pieces are going to be missed. I know a couple of years ago, one of ours completely missed everything related to housing. And so we went back and said, okay, let's back up and put some safeguards in place so this doesn't happen again. Let's talk more about self-monitoring. We work with our students on the spectrum a lot on this. Even if you know the answer, you should not answer every time, let others answer too. One discussion I've had is, I know you know the answer, the professor knows you know the answer, all the other students know you know the answer. However, if you answer everything, you are taking away from other students learning. And that was new to this person. And I said, if you do this, they're not having the opportunity to ask, because first of all, they're getting lazy knowing you're going to do it. Second of all, they might not be able to get a word in edgewise. So let's talk about, for this person, we said, in these classes that are of such great, and this person was so interested in classes. I said, with these classes, let's figure out normally how many questions would other students answer. So we determined the answer was 2. So after 2 answers, this person had to stop and make a list of any other questions or side stories they wanted to share, and had to go meet with a professor afterwards if this was still on this person's mind. So we've also done things like, if you're extremely interested in the topic, then you have 30 seconds, set your watch. You can talk for 30 seconds or 1 minute. They don't realize that they are being so overbearing. That's how it comes across. They just know the information, and it's so exciting, and they want to be able to share. Another thing that we worked with our students on, and something that you'll see, we've told them, please don't confront your professor and tell them they're wrong in class. If there's an issue, contact them privately to discuss your thoughts. They didn't realize that this would be an issue. They didn't realize how it looks, how confrontational it looks, how challenging it looks, how rude it can become, when a simple discussion afterwards would have handled it much better. It may be helpful for the student to create a rule for self-guidance. Like I said, how many questions can I ask in class? If it's just something where I can speak, how many seconds, how many minutes can I speak? If I know the professor is wrong in their own mind, how do I handle this? So there are a lot of things innately that we do that we have to do outright with our students on the spectrum. All right, I've said a lot of things. Tell me what questions you have. Is there anything that you would like more information on? Any questions you have? Where shall we go from here?
Thank you, Vanessa. If anyone has any questions, you can unmute or you can enter them into the chat. I don't have any questions in the chat at this time.
Okay.
Hey, Vanessa, this is Robin.
Hey.
I'm assuming that students that you all are aware fall on the spectrum. Faculty receive notification of that just like we do with any other disability is not the right word, but I'm having trouble.
Disability, yeah.
So yeah. I'm assuming that we receive notification of that as with any other disability. Is that the case?
You should, because students, once you get to post-secondary here, it truly is up to the student to self-disclose. Some don't.
Okay.
They always should, but once they come to us, they go through the process of submitting documentation. Once it's reviewed, once accommodations are approved, I'll go over paperwork with them and say, this is what you have. You need to give this to your professors. You may or may not know the diagnosis. You may be suspicious because of characteristics, but it's up to them if they're ever going to implement. But if they want accommodations, then it has to come with paperwork from us.
Okay. Yeah. And what you said there is the exact reason that prompted this question, because I have worked with a number of students who demonstrate some of these characteristics, but have not presented paperwork that suggests, that they need these accommodations. So I just wanted to make sure that I had not missed something or something had fallen through the cracks.
No, and it may be that they have not yet been diagnosed. It may be that they are too embarrassed to come forward. Maybe they had a bad experience before. Maybe their families have said, no, we don't do this in our family. There are lots of reasons. Once they get here, they tell us they didn't know about us. They weren't allowed to come. There are 1,000 reasons why students won't use our services. But if you ever feel like there's something there, ask if they have ever talked to our office. And send them to me if you want it. If the three of us can meet, I can do whatever you would like to do. But I'd like to at least say, let me tell you what's out there, and here's documentation requirements. Here's how things go, and see what they want to do. We can't make anybody do anything, but my goodness, we can certainly offer information. But I'm sure you've seen it, because I've seen students who I know deep down this has got to be where they fall, but there's no official paperwork to go with it, so there's nothing we can do.
Right. And my pre-university background was in academically gifted education, and so in that setting, I worked with a lot of students who had been, at that time, what we identified as Asperger's diagnosis. And I see some of that in some of my students now.
I'm sure
they don't ever present paperwork. Like that inability to transfer information from one scenario to another. So when you're talking about documenting sources in a paper, they can do it fine in one paper when we go over it in the one paper, but then they can't carry that over to the next paper. So okay. All right. I won't monopolize anymore. So
No, and I don't think you're monopolizing, and I don't think it's intentionally trying to be obstinate on their part. I think they're genuinely stuck. It's like the graffiti story, things that we think, but you got to understand this. Their wiring is different than ours, and no, it can be very frustrating.
Are there any other questions, comments? Hearing none. Vanessa, thank you so much for presenting today.
Thank you so much for allowing me this time to talk with everybody. Thank you for sharing your time. I know this is a very busy time for everybody, and I thank you so much for being part of this. I would love to share the PDF that I talked about earlier. I'd love to send that to you via email if you would like it. To me, it made sense when I read it. I thought, oh, this is it. But it like I said, it tells you here's what it looks like. Here's how the behavior may be interpreted. Here's how you can kind of come about it. For me, it's reduced some frustration. So I'd like to share that with you as well. If there's anything that our office, the Accessibility Resource Center, can ever do for you, please don't hesitate to ask. If you ever have a student that you're curious about, let's chat, let's troubleshoot. We're here for you, and we appreciate so much everything that you all do. So thank you so much today for your time.